It's all just R.I.P. Nichelle today, y'all. Here on episode 269 of Trekland Tuesdays Live with me, Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, coming at you from the heart of Trekland through Portal 47 for some clarity and sanity and the big picture in everything Star Trek. Of course, we're going to be talking, reminiscing about the late, great, lovely Grace Del Nichols, her birth name, but she soon had it changed, wanted it changed, got her parents to help her change it to Nichelle Nichols, our lovely lieutenant slash commander slash captain Uhura. All things from that in her enormous legacy. We're going to be talking about that today. I do want to remind you, though, coming up very quickly while you get your Nichelle memories stirred, as if they haven't been stirred already the last couple of days. I do want to remind everybody that coming up very quickly, the time is drawing nigh for you to jump in if you're headed to Vegas to jump in our one-day Valley of Fire Vegas Memorial Tour, which is Wednesday, August 24th. That's Geek Nation Tours. I'm going to lead it again. It's a small group. It's a lot of fun. But even having said that, even more so before that, the weekend before Vegas, my own Great Birds Origins Tour, retracing Gene Roddenberry's life around Los Angeles for work, for family. It's all the places that led to the creation of Gene, that led to what he became and what Star Trek became. It's something new. It's experimental. It's the beta version, and you can get in with us. The Roosevelt Hotel, the Hollywood Roosevelt, is our hub place. You don't have to stay there. You can just meet the minivan slash minibus to join in with us. But there is a 20% off rate at the hotel if you use the promo code GR100. Alrighty? That's coming up. And of course, Trek Vegas is at the end of the month. There's a lot of excitement there. A lot of things are going to happen slapdash. A lot of plans are coming out. And meanwhile, as we're all enjoying our summer vacations, as we're all still marinating in all the headlines out of San Diego Comic-Con, still watching some of the fun repercussions out of that, we get the shocking news on Sunday that the day before, really, straight from her son, Kyle Johnson, Nichelle had passed. Obviously, we knew her health was in decline. Felt more like it was her cognitive health than her physical health. She'd seemed, for an 89-year-old to be doing pretty well. What I'm hearing is that it was something sudden, say like heart related. So it's been a real shock even to those that have been close to her. But we're all dealing with it with grace. The word is out. The entertainment community is reacting. The NASA community and the space community is reacting, of course. And of course, everything Trekland, everybody in pop culture, it's been pouring out our hearts for it. Here in Trekland, it feels like all the internet has turned into one big Star Trek Pinterest board for Nichelle. Everyone, from the high to the low, the breadth of fandom, no matter what you are, where you are, what you're doing, in or out of the industry, whatever you're doing, and around the world, people are posting their pictures. If they had a con picture autographed from 2017 or 1967, it doesn't matter. Everyone's posting their pictures and their memories. Those who worked with her are recalling that. I jumped in some on Sunday. It was kind of like my 20th anniversary of wrap up for docing at Will Rogers. So I got the news slow, but after 2 or 3 days, there's no such thing as slow. So I'm hoping in the chat today, folks are remembering. I mean, what can you not say about her? What I've been trying to focus on is we all know her as Uhura. We all know the amazing saga that is on 2 or 3 levels right there. We know that just the fact that she was a black person, much less a black woman, on the bridge, on a failed little 60s show, on an amazing, groundbreaking pioneer show in that role. And even though we've heard the story now, but even though it's out there, it's something to stop and take a breath. And for all the folks that take this for granted, look, I think we're living in a world right now where we're suddenly going to start taking a lot of things not so for granted. Cultural attitudes, cultural mores, even legal rights are suddenly not going to be so automatic. And to blithely say, seeing Nichelle Nichols, seeing Lieutenant Uhura back there, even if she didn't have a lot of lines, most of the episodes sitting right there to Captain Kirk's right-hand side, right off his right hand, even more so in shot than, say, Spock would be. Or the helm folks, Sulu and Chekhov, Scotty even. to see her constantly in frame that way, and a reminder that that's the future and that's what can be. Of course, that was all part of Star Trek's story. I mean, if you're listening to me today, you know all this. What I'm challenging everyone today is to remember that for the folks who are younger. Make that alive, make that fresh context, which is the world in which, yeah, her famous Martin Luther King story, fundraiser, Beverly Hills. I'm sure it was for for racial rights, racial social justice, and Martin Luther King is a speaker. And after it's over, he knows she's there, and someone goes to her and says, "There's a Star Trek fan here. Do you have a minute to say hello to them?" And she's thinking, "Okay, fine." Now, if it's a fundraiser like that, you're thinking, well, it's, I don't know, fairly well-off people. It's not the kids coming in the back door, or maybe it was. Who knows? All we know is that she did indeed meet him and had the shocking news for him at the end of the season, basically in hiatus time. So what is this, the spring of 67? He has another year to live. But she's telling Dr. King that, it hasn't been a huge role for her. Maybe it wasn't all she could be, because the other thing to remember about Nichelle was she was so much more. She was so much bigger than Star Trek in her own career. Before that, she had had breaks, dancing, singing, and even some modeling. But she loved singing. She loved live performance. She was in stage production. She was in Carmen Jones. She was in Porgy and Bess. She had her eye on Broadway and New York, and that's really where she wanted to get to. Star Trek was amazing, and she, as we do sometimes, we don't realize the impact we're having. We don't realize the forest for our own trees. And it took Dr. King to say, "No, you stay right there. You are too important. Don't you get it? Do you know the impact you're having?" And eventually, over the years, after she did stay, she did realize by the time of the 70s and the 80s, and by the time she and her castmates all became iconic, whether or not they could pay their mortgages for a time, sadly. But yeah, she realized the role she had. In fact, she realized it earlier, because this is the thing that even still today, we see a lot of folks not get. Even just for the groundbreaking role in pioneering Star Trek that she played as a person of color and a woman, and then as a woman of color, all those layers. And yes, even with the diverse race, seeing a Russian and an Asian man, having that kind of diversity globally represented a united Earth for the future. She was hearing from the young kids. She was hearing from little girls. She was hearing from little black girls. She was hearing from people of all stripes, flavors, and colors. But I've been trying to, thank God this documentary was just made, Women in Motion, is to remind everyone, maybe even bigger than her Star Trek impact, is the impact she had on our real life, modern day Starfleet in the late 70s. NASA was still very much, I don't want to say an old boys network, but it all sprang, and if you know your Mercury 12, you know this story. It all sprang from the original dictum about astronauts having to be test pilots. Well, who was a test pilot? Young white male jockey boys. So who was going to be the astronauts for the first few? And yeah, there were women, there were people of color who were trying to totally qualified, trying to break through that glass ceiling, that glass cockpit window canopy in the 60s, and couldn't do it. By the 70s, how many social revolutions have we been through already? I don't mean the polyester one. I mean in real life. And it was time. It was ripe for Nichelle to partner up with NASA and start recruiting in urban high schools, in rural high schools, places where kids that never thought about themselves having a career like that, much less being in a spaceship, wearing a flag on their patch and doing historic things. Today, we're all about STEAM education, STEM education. Now, STEAM include the arts, science, technology, engineering, math, and then throw the arts in there. We're all about that today. Really, what Nichelle was kind of the first person to embrace that and go where no NASA recruiter had gone before, where no futurist Imagineer in young kids' minds, aside from Star Trek reruns, had gone before. And the impact is measurable. It's amazing. The classes of astronauts that started to be turned out for the new shuttle program, which was running a few years late. I mean, sadly, it was 4 years into the flights. And some of her astronauts were training and getting up there. And sadly, the Challenger crew that tragically lost its lives in early 1986 had 2 or 3 of her recruits. Ron McNair, but the first black astronaut, if not one of the first. Judy Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, I think our first Asian ethnic astronaut. All were in that crew, aside from, yes, Krista McAuliffe, the teacher in space, and the entire Bowen Smith and all the crew. But it was amazing how she had such a personal bond to that tragedy. But yet in the big picture, opening a door, I mean, that just spotlight the impact she'd had, and how she changed the face of our modern day future in space. It really did start to look like the face of America. And by then, was it really about how much she was making for her SAG pension and health fund? I mean, by then, it's that whole cast had to get over the fact that they were forever going to carry these mantles, especially Dee and Jimmy and Nichelle and Walter and George. And they all wanted to be actors. They all wanted juicy parts. They all wanted to keep plying their craft. And it was an uphill battle. And it was a struggle for those first 10, 15 years. Icons are great if they don't have to worry about life and the oddities of day-to-day life, the necessities. But yes, she has a great family. Her son Kyle, who's been back in the spotlight here lately, not without controversy, and apparently most all of it unearned. And that's been her sad legal problems here lately, not of her own doing, but of those around her. Agent versus family. And although it was muddied for a while, it's clear now what's happening. Although, sad to say, Nichelle's passing is not going to end that. There's still ongoing legal wrangling going on about her estate. And fortunately, her family, and if you saw anything coming out of the December Nichelle farewell, you saw how together her family was. They called her Auntie Shelley. She had a great family. You know, she's from the Chicago area, actually a suburb, Robbins, Illinois. Her dad was a factory worker, but he was also elected the town mayor of Robbins, and he was its chief magistrate. His wife was a homemaker. So she had humble but upward, they were instilling in her a sense of what she could do. And by the time she was a teenager, she was in shows, musicals, building that career. And that's how she got to Star Trek. She actually got to Star Trek. Her first television credit was touched by fame and fate and greatness too. She was in one of the episodes of the one season series that Gene did before Star Trek, The Lieutenant. It's black and white. It's a half-hour dramedy. It's a drama, not even a dramedy. Gary Lockwood, right? Gary Mitchell is the lead, playing a young, idealistic Marine lieutenant. And this is before the tragedy. This is before the excesses of Vietnam, and you could still sell a drama, straight up drama about life at a Marine base. Robert Vaughn was his commanding officer, and then all kinds of guest stars, including Leonard Nimoy, including Majel Barrett. See the testing ground here, and including one Nichelle Nichols, who was maybe the third guest star billing. She played the fiancée of Don Marshall's character, Lieutenant Boma from the Galileo 7, and of course from Land of the Giants, his regular role. And also an up-and-coming young actor, a guy you may have heard of, Dennis Hopper. And basically it was a show about race. It was about Hopper played a racist Marine who you didn't know it on the surface, but he had been recalled by Don Marshall's character from back home. They were both from the same hometown, and they had done really, really, Klan level attacks, burnings, beatings, intimidations, and they took it out at the base. And of course, Lieutenant Rice, Gary Lockwood's character, is trying to make it right, is the name of the episode. And Nichelle played the fiance, who was telling him to stop being so angry and can't you just get along? And he was a real firebrand. And of course, the way is to try to bond the Marine way, simplify everybody, and overlook the color. That was the thrust of the episode. And she was a standout. And she has a wonderful story in her book. If you haven't seen it, it may get rare now, but maybe it's out there to have, Beyond Uhura. She tells a wonderful story about the whole shooting personally. You may recognize one of the directors, Vince Mckevitty, who directed for Mckevitty or Mckevitty, I can never remember. Directed for Star Trek, was the director of that episode. Small town, everybody. Mid-60s Hollywood. finally yelled at her for getting out of her key light. And she finally said, I don't know what a key light is. And he said, all these years in TV. And she said, this is my first TV role. And he took her aside and coached her on some TV skills really quickly. Anyway, it was a wonderful experience for her. Certainly put her on Gene Roddenberry's radar in more ways than one, because they had an affair for a while. It was crazy. And to her, Gene was happy to have relief from his unhappy home life with Majel and Nichelle both. But Nichelle quickly realized what was going on and backed off, and still loved him his whole life. But she saw the way Majel was, and they both knew that Gene and Eileen's marriage was just a year or two away from not being there anymore, from going away. What an amazing stirring pot right then. And into all of that is where her episode of The Lieutenant was censored, not allowed to be shown, threatened with, because it dealt with racism. It's all well and good to deal with all these other issues and dramas, but boy, racism was the third rail. We were a long way from Archie Bunker and Sammy Davis Jr. and Room 222 and Diane Carroll's Julia. We were a long way from a lot. We were a long way from the interracial kiss in third season. The black-white interracial kiss. Yes, I know Frances Nguyen was Asian. That technically should have been counted as the interracial kiss if you're keeping score at home. I know there were the Brit television moments, and even Sammy Davis Jr.'s variety special with, I think it was it Nancy Sinatra? Anyway, scripted drama in the black-white divide. And that's also Nichelle's legacy there that we all can point to. I just want to make sure that her NASA legacy, and again, Woman in Motion is the documentary that's just been out for a couple of years. It's on Paramount Plus, so that's handy. You should really crank it up and take a look. This amazing career she had even before Star Trek. She told the story of how she actually sneaked into being singing for Duke Ellington, the great Duke Ellington's band. She also sang with Lionel Hampton. If you know your big bands, that was through the 50s and 60s. And just personally, I, had gotten to know Nichelle over the years, crossing paths. I mean, I started off the fan. I've got my first autographed fan picture that I'm trying to remember where I had it autographed by her finally. And then over the years, coming across increasingly. And I'm going to say this. At one point, she had started to tell the Martin Luther King story. And I certainly recall this at FedCon in the aughts. They had these giant press conferences where they put all 15 guests at the table, but the press is there and they only really want to talk to the 2 or 3 headliners, and the rest of us just sit there quietly and smile. And that's wonderful. And one of the European reporters asked her to tell the Martin Luther King story. And I hate to admit this now, because I've been talking about this. I inwardly groaned. This was 2008, I don't know, 2006, because every time I'd heard her tell it, it got longer and more embellished and more embellished. And remember, so yes, shame on me, because within a few years later, I was at another such event, and she was someone asked her to tell the Martin Luther King story in the mid-2010s. And I thought, okay, here we go. And she basically gave you a glorified paragraph. And that's when it hit me, A, extreme shame and guilt that I'd ever thought I could hear that story too long, too often. And B, I knew that was starting to be the beginning of her feeling her limits and pulling back, not just to tell one story, but that less is more. Less is just fine. Less is good. And of course, the last few years, we've all watched it. We've been a part of that. It was the same thing with Jimmy Doohan, watching him pull back. Watching Leonard had very pronounced moments of pulling back his career. That's why, like, damn you pandemic, but we beat you anyway. It was such a miracle now in hindsight to have that farewell celebration for Nichelle just last December here in LA at the LA Comic-Con. Now, it was not what it was intended to be at the beginning, a standalone event that would have had people from all over the world in May of 2020. So that had to go away. And even with one or two restarts, as we all were dealing with the COVID crazy, the rescission of that, and what one step forward, two steps back, it felt like. So even as things were starting to clear up, and even in the fears of another wave last winter of Omicron, went ahead with it under the umbrella of LA Comic Con. So I want to say shout out to them, and shout out to Doug Conway, or Sky Conway, for working with Kyle and the family and still making that farewell celebration happen. It was just a fraction of the size of what it could have been, would have been, and should have been. But for the 100, 200, 300 fans there at various times, it was a godsend. And the best part of all, maybe to help with that, was how much of the video was shared around the world. I think you all saw her, especially at the end, the closing ceremonies. The folks from NASA, Dr. Mae Jemison was there, one of the many people she had inspired, along with Whoopi Goldberg, along with Celia Rose Gooding, who's playing Uhura now on Strange New Worlds. A long, long list of celebrities. They're all chiming in. Of course, Walter and George. Zoe Saldana had a very, very sweet tribute on her Instagram just recently. But that's the kind of thing that's happening. It's coming from all over. Of course, that's what we expect. Of course, that's what the fans are doing. But it was so sweet that we did have those closure moments in December. And it was just an honor and a treat for me to be there with her, not taking a lead, but winding up being a host called on several times, more than the original plan called for. Most of all, she wasn't part of it. She was there. She was resting by that time because she'd had like a 2-hour signing time that stretched into 3 hours, I think, for the last chance to have something signed by Nichelle. It was a thrill to be there with her family and lead a panel with Kyle and her sisters, all the cousins, all her nephews and nieces in the audience, the big bulk of their family, and just sit back and let them take it away and tell stories on Nichelle when she was younger, tell stories when she was a young mom, all of that. And that was something that I'll never forget. I've still got to get the video of that panel, but I was so proud to do it. And it was something that I knew, even though we needed more fans there to hear all this, it was a great, another angle, another insight into the woman that we were all honoring that weekend and that we're all, mourning today. I have to say, though, that of all those years and crossing paths and saying hi, Nichelle, and then being there and helping with the farewell, the most time I ever spent with her personally, and this is all obviously the last 10, 15 years, after 20 years of far being a fan, just as we were of all the original cast, was probably about 3 hours we spent at her house filming her interview for The Con of Wrath, my documentary that we are back working on. Many of you still ask about it. I know it's taken way too long, but we're back on track with it now. But the important part was getting the interviews done. And this was 2015. It's 7 years ago. And her cognitive had started to slip a little then, and I was more than a little concerned. But we had got that set up thanks to seeing her again at Arlene Martel's memorial service. Arlene Martel, who played T'Pring and died suddenly, and surprise guest was Here Comes Nichelle to join all the original series fellow guest stars of Arlene. I'm going to say I got in her face after everyone had done their appropriate memorializing and then reunionizing, and got her there. And we set it up, went to her famous house there in Nichols Canyon, and I had a scare because we sat down and did kind of a short pre-interview and then sat down, and she did a mind blink for a minute, and I just kept going. We had just been talking and then we lost it, but we wound up getting most all of it back. And along the way, I got the wonderful story on camera of how she sneaked her way in as a dancer to being a lead singer for Duke Ellington at times. And some of the things that were on the sidebar, not so much to do with Star Trek, much less the Con of Wrath, the Ultimate Fantasy event in Houston in 1982. But even some NASA space comments, but some social justice and labor. I'm going to try to get them out of this and get them. And I hadn't even showed those to some of the crowdfunding parties that I did at conventions for several. The Dr. Trek show. There's a clip of her we would share about her music side. But I'm going to bring out something she talked about, having a union and having contracts and what that meant to her. But I'll always cherish that day because that's the most time I ever just spent with her normal. And to have her offering to get us a glass of water Would you like a sandwich? I've got some cookies. I mean, she was being Auntie Shelley for us, and just wonderful. And yes, I did get her to sign her book for me. Aside from that one autograph I got in the 80s, I didn't ever feel like I needed another one. But I did have her sign, and she took a bath on this. She had a two-sided 45 made up to sell at the Houston Con that she sold for years after that because nobody was there to buy it. And then I got her to sign her autograph. I don't know if this has been digitized, but we need to digitize it. Beyond Antari's, her new version recorded, and Uhura's theme. So apparently it was a little bit of a surprise. She went a little more sudden than we knew. I'm hearing a lot of plans in the work to further her legacy, her foundation. She was a part of, may have a new iteration. I know Paramount is wanting to do some partnerships and do some memorial work. So this is not the end of all of us honoring and remembering fondly our dear Nichelle. I'm sure, sadly, that there's going to be some legal settlements still in the works, and hopefully that won't become a downer as everybody goes forward. And one of my first thoughts when I got the news was, and then there are 3. So some of the memes, some of the postings, everybody's been paying all this lovely tribute to Nichelle and joining Dee and Jimmy and Leonard and Grace Lee and Jean and everyone connected with Star Trek, those icons that had built so much. And good to see Zoe and Celia and everyone else of all the things, realizing the doors that she opened even when she didn't realize it at first. And even seeing some pushback from folks saying how sad it is that we're calling her a pioneer, that she shouldn't have had to pioneer anything in the first place, which is true. But Nichelle, a lot of people have the heart to do that. A lot of people need the grit and the determination and the vision to promote themselves, but also to promote what's right and what's going to be right for others, as she did in entertainment, but as she did in beyond NASA, the astronaut corps, the entire realm of science and technology, engineering and mathematics, and the arts. Yeah. Once again, something about Star Trek is inventing the thing before we have the buzzword for it. That was our grand lady. That was Nichelle. So I'm hoping, I know we've had 2 days of this already. I almost jumped in with something soon, but I thought I'll just save it for Tuesday's Live, because we started a little core series called Second Opinion. I hope you look for it. Hope you will like and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. That's going to be coming. I'm just going to, hopefully a day or two after a news headline or a new episode breaks, I'll let the dust settle a day or two, and then I'll come in with a little bit of an angle maybe you hadn't thought of. So, because, I don't know if you've noticed, but Star Trek's ramping up. Star Trek's getting big. Star Trek got a lot of attention at Comic-Con. Even as some of the other franchises, it's not a race, it's not a contest. But even as some of the other franchises kind of retrench, pull back, take a breather, Star Trek is stepping out as it should, with this business model, with this capacity to tell so many stories, to touch so many hearts, to reach into so many niches, even if it is all out of Toronto. To have a whole new era. It is a Latinum era? I saw people trying to call it that now. So we'll see. But for right now, as sadly we've done in 1999 and 2005 and 2015, and yes, for those of you who are around in 1991, we're having a sad moment here to take stock and reflect and celebrate. And really, really reflect on how this was more than just a little TV show, more than just a talented cast, more than just a bunch of really cool creatives and writers. What once again, what a mark Gene Roddenberry and his Star Trek and everybody he brought to the fold has had on the world, the culture, and all of us. Okay, one more Nichelle story, and I don't want to steal Neil Halford, my DP's thunder. He had there's a camera DP trick, a very cheap way to get a lot of diffuse lighting. get Chinese lanterns, the wire, the paper lanterns, get a globe and rig up which is what, $2, and rig a simple light bulb in that. And it's a wonderful diffuse light. And if you see some of the pictures from our shoot, you'll see that. When we were done and packing up, Nichelle looked up and she said, oh, I want that. And Neil started to say, oh, well, it's easy. You can get those for like $2 at Home Depot and Lowe's. And she said, no, I want that. And he was like, oh, you mean you want it? And she's like, yeah. And he said, can I take the light bulb out of it first? The light bulb rigging? And she said, sure. So in her house filled with so many mementos and artworks from fans and so many souvenirs and paintings from Trek and fandom and NASA and Africa and so many aspects of her music, everyone she'd worked with in music, in the very front of her house at the time. So for a few years, hung this paper round party lantern. Because, it was only a couple of bucks from Home Depot. But that was our Nichelle. She was a hoot. I want to thank everybody who made this possible, all of our Patreons, okay? So thank you, Diana Hopkins, Robin Wilson, Lawrence Todd, Anne-Marie Siegel, Keith Rombach, Justin Porteous, Blaze K, Nathaniel Robinson, Andrew Jasinski, and Pranakasha Productions. And then our live wires, Rusty Harrell, Halberd Gunn Johnson, Robert McLean, Alan Johansey, J.R. Poole, Byron Bailey, David Gregory, Gay Clevin Lundstrom, and Casey Shafsky. Thanks so much, guys and gals, peeps. Our Patreon is very simple. It's patreon.com/TreklandLive. We are slowly expanding the streaming empire here at Trekland. Have you noticed? So we've got Second Opinion now. We are going to be hopefully growing a little bit what we do here on Tuesdays live as soon as I can get around to it. Maybe get through August in Vegas. We'll see. Love it if you can come over. Thank you for the support. I keep it small on purpose so a lot of folks can take part, and it's easy on me. Meanwhile, of course, around the rest of Trekland, the Trek Files is on hiatus, but that means you can just go back and look at the back 8 seasons, including folks who are no longer with us. But the Trek Files is where you can find us, and we'll be back in about a month from our hiatus for season 9. That's amazing. And meanwhile, you can check out all the podcasts at podcast.roddenberry.com. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Don't forget, go to LarryNemecek.com for the tour info. Actually, we have 4 tours up right now. The Great Birds tour is just the first one. It's coming up. The Vegas one day is with Geek Nation Tours is up. Also, I'm going to be offering a local Trekland Treks the day before the cruise leaves next spring. So you want to get in on that. And then next July is our huge West Coast tour. It's 10 days in LA and San Francisco that Geek Nation Tours and I are doing next July. So you've got a year to prep for that. The Twitter is at Larry Nemecek. Everything else is Larry's Trekland or Larry Nemecek's Trekland. Again, jump on with us there on YouTube and like and subscribe if you would. And Facebook and Instagram. And of course, portal47.net for your behind the scenes, your minicon all year long, no matter where your center seat is. Alrighty. If you're watching later, join us live if you can. But for right now, if you're leaving us, stay well, everybody. Do all the things. Stay woke. Check your sources. And most of all, trek well, everybody. Nichelle.